Welcome to Green and Red, Scrappy Politics for Scrappy People, a regular podcast on radical environmental and anti-capitalist politics, brought to you by Bob Bazanko and Scott Parkin.
To the silky smooth sounds of the Green and Red podcast. I'm your co-host, Scott Parkin, back in Berkeley, California. And as always, I am joined by
Bob Bazanko in my kind of last days almost in Ohio, and welcome back to the United States. I know, being the good patriot that you are, you couldn't wait to get back here and put your flag out. And
well, I was pretty happy to come back to the third indictment of our of our former president. Because we've been waiting for that shoe to drop for a while, and it was. I'm sure there's many patriots out there who are waving flags and very sad to see that the Donald was arraigned yesterday.
And they're opening up their checkbooks and writing checks out because he's allegedly broke, and I think the best part is Rudy Giuliani, though, seeing this shit coming out about him. So
yeah. I no longer call him Rudy Giuliani. I call him co-conspirator number one.
Unindicted as of yet.
Unindicted co-conspirator number one.
We live in weird times. Mike Pence has become like kind of the moral compass of America now.
Yeah. I was also like pleasantly, whatever, Pence is a piece of shit, let's just be clear, but like I was like really pleasantly surprised to see him actually be getting a little bit more aggressive with Trump on the campaign trail, and talking about how he was hijacked by a gang of crackpot lawyers. So it was kind of, I was like, whoa, must be like AI or something like that.
Yeah, it's strange. I don't know what to think. What I keep going back to is this: how can you look at, the Republican Party really is fractured, right? How can you look at this and say this is the most important election ever, and we're headed toward fascism, and then say, and by the way, Biden is our candidate. He's old, he's adult, he's met some mort, he's basically abandoned people who voted for him. But this is the guy we're going to go with. We're not even thinking about anybody else. So
it's going to be morning in America, actually, I believe is what the consultants are telling him.
Oh God,
he's going to go with the 1984 Reagan theme. Is one thing I've read.
Oh my God! Well, 40 years we've gone backward. So
yeah. That being said, speaking of going backward, maybe we can do a little this week in history.
Yeah, is this a Scrappy Sunday episode? What we're doing right now?
Yeah, it is Scrappy Sunday. Yeah,
you can tell us we haven't really kind of coordinated this very well because Scott's back in country and back at work and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah,
I've had a bourgeois summer. I've been golfing. So
yeah. Bob's been picking up on his golf game. Upping his scores and hanging out at the country club.
Yeah. A public course.
Country club summer for Bob Bazanko.
A public course in Vienna, Ohio.
Yeah.
It's not Vienna, it's Vienna.
Vienna, Ohio.
Vienna,
right?
Not Vienna.
Right. Yeah. So talking about this week in history, the ones that what I kind of wanted to talk about, we have a couple different things to talk about here. I first want to say on July 29th, 1932, which was within the last week, it was the anniversary of where the troops dispersed the bonus army of World War I veterans, where thousands had camped out demanding payment due for service. This is when the Depression had kicked in. There were a lot of benefits, and this is something we see still today, is like veterans getting screwed over on benefits because the members of Congress in both parties are often voting against VA increasing or sustaining VA benefits. But there was a riot with war vets and where the army basically kind of moved in to disperse their encampment and their protest, led by I believe Dwight D. Eisenhower and George Patton.
MacArthur.
Oh, MacArthur. But Eisenhower and Patton were aides to MacArthur during that.
Yeah, I don't know what Eisenhower's role was, but MacArthur and Patton for sure. Yeah.
So that was June 29th, 1932. The other one I wanted to kind of mention is August 1st, 1917, when Frank H. Little, who was an anti-war activist and an IWW organizer, was lynched in Butte, Montana. Little was also like mixed race. He was part Cherokee and part white, but he was on the IWW's executive board, and he was killed for organizing copper workers at the Anaconda Copper Company. And so, so, you know, salute to Frank Little, who died for the cause.
Yeah. Anaconda Copper was also much later would play a major role in Chile in 1973, supporting the coup against Allende. A couple things. One event, which there are kind of two different dates for it, which is really important. August 2nd and August 4th, 1964, were the alleged attacks on U.S. boats in the Gulf of Tonkin in Vietnam. American ships had been conducting intelligence and infiltration for quite some time in northern Vietnam. And at that point, these ships, the turned to join the Maddox, were actually in Vietnamese territorial waters in the north. So they were inside Vietnam's waters, which means they weren't outside it where they could have monkey knife fights. So no monkey knife fights were going on at that moment. And they got reports that they had been attacked by DRVN, Northern Vietnamese boats. And when LBJ first heard it, he kind of laughed and said, those stupid sailors were probably shooting at flying fish. But very quickly, they pivoted to use this as kind of a reason for war, casus belli. And they claimed that the Vietnamese had attacked. And so just a few days after that, the House of Representatives and the Senate voted overwhelmingly, with only 2 votes against it, Morse and Gruning in the Senate, for the Southeast Asia resolution, otherwise known as the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, which gave the U.S. The power, the authority to take all measures necessary to protect American interest in Southeast Asia. Johnson said it's like grandma's nightshirt, it covers everything. And that would become kind of the legal rationale for the war. Now, a lot of the conspiracy people often cite this and say, you know, it's one of their conspiracies for war. You know, provoking the other side is and making them responsible for hostilities is not a conspiracy. That's just a strategy in war. And you've seen that with, you know, Lincoln at Appomattox and I'm sorry, Sumter and, you know, remember the Maine and the Lusitania and Sussex in World War I. And so, you know, the U.S. had been conducting these patrols, DeSoto patrols and what was it, 34A, Op Plan 34A operations. And they've been doing that for quite some time. Which is conducting, you know, intelligence and recon above the 17th parallel. And so that became the basis in the aftermath of the Gulf of Tonkin resolution. It was an election year, so Johnson's running as a peace candidate, but they did begin air attacks against the North, and that did, you know, kind of created even more impetus for a larger war. You know, so it's important in that regard. And, you know, it's not a conspiracy. It's not a false flag or anything like that. It's what countries do. They provoke other countries and they conduct operations and recon and intelligence. And so the Gulf of Tonkin is really important. What we found out since then, and there have been a lot of studies and a lot of documents released on it, is that clearly, you know, the U.S. did provoke this confrontation, and it, you know, blew it up way out of proportion. And that especially the second attack on August 4th, I think it was, never really happened. And the first ones are even kind of sketchy. So anyway, it's worth remembering that. And then, of course, something that's actually been in the news a lot lately because of the Oppenheimer movie, which I have not seen yet, so I can't speak about. But August 6th, 1945, obviously, was the date that the United States dropped the first atomic bomb on Hiroshima. We've done a show on that, which we will release, which goes into a lot of detail about the politics and the strategy behind dropping the bomb. Like I said, I haven't seen the movie. I don't know what the basic idea there is, but you know, as we made it clear in our episode on that, which I think was our first YouTube episode ever, actually.
We did it in 2020.
2020, yeah, for the 75th anniversary, right? But, you know, quite clearly, the United States knew that Japan, you know, was in bad shape. They were basically defeated. They had messages, you know, gotten, you know, background messages that the Japanese wanted to surrender. They were ready to get out, but the United States wanted to send a message to the Soviet Union, to the rest of the world, basically establishing, you know, hegemony in the Cold War. They had a nuclear monopoly at the time. They didn't want the Soviet Union to be part of the war against Japan. The United States wanted to defeat the Japanese by themselves. And the Japanese, as John Dower eloquently wrote about, wanted to embrace defeat. They wanted to lose to the United States rather than the Soviet Union, because, as you've seen, the U.S. helped rebuild Japan after World War II. So in the context of the Oppenheimer movie, I know a lot of people are talking about this, but check out our old episode. It's really good. And it really reflects what people who study this think about it. Within the U.S., there's still this general idea that, the bomb was dropped to end the war and they had no choice to do it and blah, blah, blah. But if you read the literature, and this is something I've done my whole life because it's kind of the field I'm in, so I've read pretty much everything important about that up to at least 5-10 years ago, at least. But the people who study it overwhelmingly, say, no, the bombs, like Gar Alperovitz is the best at that, right? Who have basically pointed out that the military was opposed to the use of the bomb. A lot of main advisors were, but clearly it had much bigger, the atomic scientists were. It had a lot, the context was a lot bigger than that. It was about the Cold War. It's about containing the Soviet Union, having a nuclear monopoly, keeping the Soviet Union out of Japan, and basically sent a message that, the United States would have, kind of global hegemony and global military power after World War II and going into the Cold War. So the Gulf of Tonkin and the atomic bomb are really important expressions of power, and that's something I think that people on the left really need to think about and talk about a lot more. Just power, the imposition of power, the way you get it, the way you use it, the way you deploy it. It's a valid, we've talked about that with regard to Ukraine, right, quite a bit.
Just a real quick note on Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer was he was an avowed leftist. Both his wife and his mistress were communists. He was involved in anti-Franco causes, anti-fascist causes. He attended communist meetings. The FBI actually had a lot of concerns when the army was trying to recruit him to head the Manhattan Project, and he was convinced to do the Manhattan Project because they told him that they were worried that the Nazis were going to get the bomb first, and they wanted to pull the plug on the project and not drop the bomb once we'd had VE Day in April 1945, and at that point, that's when we feed into what this Cold War period, and Oppenheimer became a dissenter against it himself. And it's really important to note about Oppenheimer. Very he's very, as we all are. You're looking at two of the more complicated guys you're going to meet, but Oppenheimer was also a very complicated guy.
Just like John Shaft, we're complicated men.
Just like John Shaft, we're complicated men. But Oppenheimer is a pretty important figure to study. The film is getting good reviews. We're hoping to see it soon. We haven't had a chance. There's another actually great movie about Oppenheimer and the decision to drop the bomb from the late 80s called Fat Man and Little Boy with Paul Newman and Dwight Schultz. Also, it's a Roland Hoffey movie, who's a pretty notable filmmaker. So you could also check that out if you want to kind of get into your Oppenheimer mode. So,
yeah, and I think it's based on the book by Guy Bird and the late Marty Sherwin, if I'm not mistaken.
American Prometheus.
Yeah, Marty Sherwin had been working on that book for forever. I met him a couple of times. I didn't know him, but and Guy Bird came in kind of toward the end to finish it, and then Marty unfortunately died just a year or two ago, so he isn't around to see it. But Guy Bird is
that's
still
too bad.
Very active. Yeah. I just kind of want to put the word out there, so you're all prepared, because I know you're going to want to see all these and wake up the kids and call the neighbors and put it on the community bulletin board and all that kind of stuff. But very soon we will be coming out with a very important announcement. We are going to do a big series of events for the 60th anniversary of Kennedy's assassination. As you know, Scott and I have been involved for about a year and a half now with the what I call the Oliver Stone Cracker Factory. The Kennedy conspiracy theorists who
the assassinologists.
Like, if you want to say that there was, like, they talk, in the old days, it was all about magic bullets and grassy knolls and second shooters and all this stuff, which I never really cared about. But then Oliver Stone turned it into this hagiography, this heroicism of JFK. JFK was a dove and he was going to end all the wars and all this stuff. And people just accept that. And now with RFK Jr. out there saying the same stuff, people just accept it. It's not even a question. And, these folks don't look at the documents. They don't do their homework. We've done a lot of stuff on that. And so we're going to have a bunch of JFK stuff coming up, leading up to November 22nd, which will be the 60th anniversary of the assassination. We'll talk about Kennedy's role in we've done some already, but we'll go over, Vietnam again, Latin America,
Europe,
Europe, talk about
domestic.
Kennedy at home. Right. They make Kennedy out to be a civil rights hero and everything else. And Kennedy was the consummate Cold Warrior. He was a hawk. He ramped up escalations in Latin America and Vietnam, and made the Cold War worse, increased America's military budget, built new weapons. In no way, so it's really it really irritates me to be on the left and to see people making a hero out of him, people who should know better. And they're attacking Chomsky. I don't care if you attack me, man, attacking Chomsky on this. And they make a hero out of Michael Parenti, and and all these other. Then you have like, Pinto and Flounder and Pinto are very active in this. So stay tuned. We're going to have a bunch of good stuff. We'll be doing, I bet we'll probably be doing like 8 or 10 Kennedy shows, I'd say. Plus we'll release one of our best shows ever, the Cuban Missile Crisis show is like great, where it's just like as good a history as you'll get in an hour on that. So stay tuned, and
so sharpen your knives, Oliver Stone assassinologist, because we're coming for you.
Yeah, and if you know Oliver Stone, tell him, man, there's $100 on the line if he comes on, and no questions ahead of time. Well, whatever he wants to say, we believe in free speech, unlike the state of Texas, which is firing professors. We won't do that. So
we're down for it.
Yeah.
One other thing around, I would say this is around freedom of speech, but one other radical history moment that I want to mention is August 2nd was the birthday. It was the 99th birthday of novelist, playwright, poet, social critic James Baldwin, who was born in 1924 in Harlem, New York. And I was going to read a quick little prose by him. Is that cool? Are you cool with that, Bob? Yeah. So this is a prose that actually came out of, that was based on Baldwin's work, but it came out in the film Barao Peck, I Am Not Your Negro. It was about Birmingham. White people are astounded by Birmingham. Black people aren't. White people are endlessly demanding to be reassured that Birmingham is really on Mars. They don't want to believe, still less to act on the belief that what is happening in Birmingham is happening all over the country. They don't want to realize that there is not one step morally or actually between Birmingham and Los Angeles.
Yeah. Years ago, somebody gave me what he claimed was a Baldwin quote that I've repeated many times, but I've never actually been able to verify Baldwin said it, but I think it's really great. It's beneath the pavement, that's where the truth lies. Mm-hmm. And I say that a lot. I think that's important, when you're studying US history. So if anybody out there knows if Baldwin really did say that, where it comes from, let us know. But until proven otherwise, I'm just going to keep attributing it to him and saying it. So August 2nd is also my half birthday, just
So feel free to make a donation in honor of
Bob's half birthday.
Half birthday and James Baldwin's birthday.
Yeah, because
I'm at
the age now where I'm going to have that many more half birthdays left. So better get them in now, right?
You're going to live to be 100. I can tell you that right now.
Don't wish that on me.
We have a couple of other like kind of like bigger items we wanted to talk about, and then Bob had a tribute for one other person. I don't know if you want to save that for the end or do that.
No, I just not really a tribute. I just wanted to say a few words about Tony Bennett. He's an entertainer, and that's the context in which I got to know him. I grew up, as you know, in an Italian family, and so Sinatra and Tony Bennett were on a lot, and so I grew up listening to him, and I liked the music. But it was only later I found out. I think I was really actually very engaged politically. He got in trouble in the army for giving up, I believe, a seat to a black soldier or something like that in the South. He was very active in the civil rights movement. You see pictures of him with Martin Luther King, on the front lines, marching, walking. He was active. He opposed the Vietnam War. And then about 10 years after 9/11, it was around 2000, maybe on the 10th anniversary in 2011, he was talking about 9/11, and he said, look, like we brought that on ourselves because of meddling all over the world. And there was a blowback to that. And, he basically said, it's like, why do the rest of the world hate us? Because look at the shit we do. And this was Tony Bennett. Anybody but Tony Bennett probably would have gotten really destroyed, but, he caught a lot of flack, but he didn't back down. So, and Sinatra had good politics too until, the early 60s too, actually. But Tony Bennett was, I don't want to make too much out of celebrities, but he was really one of the good guys. I was very lucky. I got to see him perform just a few years ago. He'd already been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Nobody knew it. He sounded great, and it was very sad. Apparently on the last day, he was at the piano singing, and then that night, he died. So he's 96, just turned 97 a couple days ago. He just missed his 97th birthday. And culturally very important, like I said, along with Sinatra, just, kind of the score to a lot of Italian families growing up on Sunday dinners, and things like that. But also, had a really good sense of justice and, what was right and wrong, and stood up for the good guys. And so Rispetto e pace, Tony Bennett, and he's a good comrade.
Absolute. The next thing we have these kind of two bigger items.
I was going to throw it to you and say, hey, Scott, have you been on your private plane lately?
Oh, yeah, I skipped my private jet flight home.
Is that how you got back from France? You took a private jet?
Yeah.
Don't feel guilty about it. There's nothing wrong with that.
I'm a Learjet Leninist is what I am. Yeah, so just to kind of kick this off, because I would actually say this is Bob and I tried not to play too much into the outrage machine that we see on social media, but this is one that kind of really irked Bob and I would also say this has irked a number of our people in our sphere, especially when we've been saying this guy's a piece of shit. We've talked about Leigh Phillips on the show before. He's a commentator. He's associated with the Breakthrough Institute, which is like a neoliberal, technocratic, nonprofit think tank. Was actually founded by Michael Schellenberger, who is taken a serious right wing turn. But Leigh Phillips is associated with them. He's also an author. He's also writes a lot in Jacobin, really very much associates with the Jacobin left. And you see people like Matt Huber and Ben Burgess and Leigh Phillips all smoking and joking and playing off of each other on Twitter and things like that. But and so we've kind of gone after Leigh Phillips on the issues around nuclear energy. We actually talked about him some when we had Josh Frank on the show. But now Leigh Phillips has posted a new article calling for private jets for all. And he's basically making a case in quite a detailed blog that he actually put up on the Breakthrough Institute's website, because even Jacobin wouldn't post it. Where he's arguing that, I also will say kind of bigger context here is there's actually a lot of calls from environmental groups to ban private jet travel. Greenpeace in Europe has actually written a report on it, which I'm going to kind of get into a minute. The Institute for Policy Studies and the Environmental Research Agency have also kind of put out studies on the carbon footprint of private jets. But basically, the world is burning, and starving and flooding and suffering all this catastrophic climate change, and then what I would call low-level pseudo-intellectual predators like Leigh Phillips, who's just basically a flack
for say that I got low level. What's that?
Low-level pseudo-intellectual predator. Leigh Phillips, he's Canadian.
Did that just come to you, or did you have to think that out? That's pretty good.
No, I just came up with that. It just came to me. Who's really a flack for industry. He's definitely been a flack for the nuclear industry. And it sounds like he's a flack for the private jet industry at this point, who poses as a progressive or a socialist, is arguing that the recent calls, and there's a lot of direct actions actually going on at private jet airfields around the US and in Europe as well, to ban private jets are useless, and we should just socialize the use of private jets. I want to say that, one, we're not actually living in the kind of world right now where we're going to see some socialist revolution that privatizes all private jets. And so to me, the disruption of private jet traffic and, making the lives of billionaires and celebrities and wealthy people not being able to take their private jets, more difficult and and shame them around it is actually an important thing to do. But just 1% of the global population is responsible for half of the world's aviation emissions. And that's a lot of private jet flights. Private jets cause about 10 times more CO2 emissions than regular flights, and 50 times more than the average train ride. Actually, in reality, about 80% of the world's population has never flown, yet they're the ones also being most impacted by the climate crisis. And so, to have someone like Leigh Phillips, advocating for, private, he also claims that he's pro-nuclear because of the climate crisis, yet he's advocating for private jets. I will also say that private jets have all these tax incentives, like a lot of the FAA, for example, is paid out of tax dollars coming from domestic airline flights, which is the customers. And so when you ride coach in a plane, you're paying for, the regulation of the aviation industry. The private people riding on private jets pay like less than 1% of the taxes on that. The amount of private jet, so there's like a whole thing where the rich are just getting richer and they get to ride around in their private jets like they're fucking taxis or Ubers or whatever. But then also we have the amount of private jet traffic since 2020, because apparently there's been a COVID private aviation boom, has increased by about 65%. And just as an example of one of our other favorite billionaires in the public eye, Elon Musk took one private jet flight about every other day in 2022, producing over 2,100 tons of carbon emissions just himself in last year alone. That's 132 more times than the entire carbon footprint of an average individual in the US. And so, we're talking about a industry, and we're talking about technology that is by and for the rich. They are protected from it. The traffic is protected by it. There's a huge private jet lobby, which spends about $2.4 million every year since 2008, lobbying the federal government for tax giveaways. And it was led to the growth of this industry. And so I just want to say that when we see people like Leigh Phillips, who are now like basically lobbying, socialists and progressives to think differently about private jets, he's really just doing the bidding of, the billionaire class, despite what he says. And if you actually read his article, he makes a lot of arguments. It's like, well, I'm not doing this because Taylor Swift gets to ride in her $40 million jet. I think there's a lot of benefits in it for regular people, but that's actually not true. He's basically just sort of shadow flacking for the private industry, the private aviation industry, and the billionaire class.
In addition to that, the kind of whole idea of socialism in the United States.
And that was my rant. I just really went off about that. I just want to say
it'll be good. We can chop that and put it out because no, I mean, the other part is like, if you're going to call yourself a socialist, you don't defend private planes and major corporations like he does, or I don't get it. It'd be like defending yachts and polo clubs and the country club, right? I mean, the orcas are attacking the yachts, but there's no like bird big enough to, attack the private planes, I guess. But
it's more of and for the birds, it'd be more of a suicide run too, which is sad.
Yeah. But the thing is, like, these jets are incredibly expensive. So in order to have them, people like Taylor Swift and A-Rod, Oprah Winfrey have private jets. So I mean, they're really out of reach. In a way, so it's really odd to like you would pick that to defend. Like, what would make you think like, oh, let me say something about private jets when, most people, as you said, they can't even afford to go on an airplane and to fly coach in an uncomfortable cramped position. A lot of these people own private jets because their taxes have been cut over the years. They have these insane amounts of wealth. The number of billionaires has gone up. The amount of money controlled by the top 1% has just soared in the last 10 years, and during COVID even more. So if you're going to call yourself a socialist, then you really have to understand the economics and class issues surrounding every issue, right? And private jets is just insane. If we had a decent tax structure, these people would be paying more taxes in order to kind of promote air safety or, make it easier for all of us to fly. And, last year, I never look at my tickets. When I look at a ticket, there's actually a 911 tax on every airline ticket. I never knew, but there's a 911 fee, which I'm sure has been around for 20 years, but I just saw it last year. So we're paying more. They're getting subsidized. They're flying all over the world. They're destroying the environment. And you have people who call themselves socialists. And, I've always been of the mind, like, if you want to call yourself socialist, fine. It's not for me to decide who is or who isn't, but I'm going to put my foot down. These guys are not socialists. If you're defending private planes and nuclear corporations, you aren't a socialist, right? It'd be like I said, I don't defend yachts and polo clubs.
You're
right?
fake socialists.
Yeah, can you imagine Eugene
Sinos, socialist in name only.
Only. Can you imagine Debs or somebody like that defending, private? Debs went on strike against Pullman, which was making, private train cars, so.
And one of Phillips' arguments in his defense that he's been saying in his defense is that this is the same. He's basically regurgitating the same policy that Jeremy Corbyn has, which maybe not, but still, so-called socialist rags like Jacobin should actually think twice about affiliating with people like Leigh Phillips. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. It's just a waste. It's a waste, and it's getting too much attention. That's the problem with these guys. No matter what they say, they're gonna, they got a lot of oxygen going. We don't, So we're scrappy, and we're kind of clawing and fighting against those folks. We're not from Brooklyn,
No.
So, but that's just insane. And yeah, people on the left really don't need to be bogged down with these debates over. What would make you think, like, I'm going to write an article, I'm going to write a blog about private airplanes and defense of private airplanes this week? I don't get it.
It's a long article with a lot of research too.
No, I read
weird.
Most of it.
Yeah.
I give it a quick Evelyn Wood read, but still, I just like, oh man.
Yeah.
But like, what makes you think about that in the first place? And and to do it in the name of socialism is insane. So, but say la vie. A lot of people call themselves socialists nowadays and don't seem to be able to walk the walk. But
no, they endorse Biden. They vote for defense budgets out of control. They support the war in Ukraine. None of that doesn't feel like the socialists of 100 years ago. Doesn't feel like Debs or the IWW or the.
You're defending
SP.
NATO. You're on the same side. You're saying the same things as Blinken and NATO. The people who are using cluster bombs. Oh, and by the way, make sure you check out, we are now doing commentaries where we'll pick an item and do a short thing on it. And don't forget the Green and Red archives too. We now have, we've been putting out some stuff. We started because, things were kind of slow in the summer, but we have a Daniel Ellsberg speech. We have a Chomsky speech. We have a Chomsky interview. We have some more stuff we'll put out. Yep. So check out the archives and the commentaries as well. So but,
the last thing that we were going to talk about today is the we've done shows on the WTO and we've done shows on trade and like social movements resisting like sort of big all powerful entities. That is we're in the midst of that happening again now. The Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation, which is a transnational forum to promote free trade in the Asia Pacific region with 21 member economies, is actually in the process of negotiating an agreement. The U.S. is part of APEC, China, Japan, Australia, many countries all over the Indo-Pacific region, Asia Pacific region. In the Obama years, it was previously known as the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and now they're trying to bring it back because the right and the progressives in Congress back in the Obama years had actually voted it down. But there's also like a big movement afoot to sort of resist it from the left. Just a couple of facts around APEC is that if ratified, it will govern the economy for about 40% of the world population. From an environmental and climate perspective, 75% of all mining, trade, and investment will be governed by APEC, 60% of global energy demand, 55% of global energy production. And then the APEC, what will be the APEC trade zone, will be the destination of more than 60% of goods exports from the U.S. And so it's really it's an important thing. It has been being negotiated in secret. They've been having negotiations for like over a year. The agreement, they're actually calling it the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity. It's always like really sort of flowery language, but it's all being negotiated in secret. There's actually no way to actually even see what they're talking about in the talks. Substantial pillars that they're talking about is going to be around trade, supply chains, clean economy, and a fair economy. They just had a ministerial last weekend in Seattle where about 500 people protested. We're seeing a sort of, like I said, an upsurge, whereas particularly seeing a lot of, in the US, a lot of Asian American student groups, Asian American diaspora, fair trade groups, and increasingly environmental groups like get involved in the protests. The last thing I want to say about this is that it is going to finish. They're going to have more secret talks, negotiations in San Francisco in early November. And then in mid-November, once the agreement has supposedly been done and signed by all the parties, they're going to actually have a huge summit in San Francisco as well, which will include Joseph R. Biden, Xi Jinping, Fumio Kishida, who's the Prime Minister of Japan, all of the heads of state, plus the CEOs of Exxon, Citibank, the big tech companies, lots of other companies, mining interests, and so this is like another sort of movement sort of moment starting to happen, because there's also a lot of protests being planned by, lots of different, labor, students, a lot of the Asian American students and diaspora groups, environmentalists, etc. And so I just kind of wanted to I'm hoping that we'll be talking about this more at the Green and Red podcast, because I'm based in the Bay Area and a lot of the organizing is going to be going on around here.
That's how we kind of met, doing globalization work at the time as WTO and NAFTA, and it's still going on, and the issues are pretty similar, although I think much worse now. So it's important to get labor involved with environmental groups, and because I think stuff like this, everybody has a stake in it, and even if you don't think, and you're seeing that right now. Look at this summer. You can, you really don't have the luxury of sitting out global warming anymore, because it's hit home. Phoenix finally had a day under 110. Texas has had constant, especially the heat index has been in the high hundreds. Sicily had 118 degrees. Rome was at 109. So, you don't have the luxury of saying, it doesn't exist or it's not a problem, because it's hitting home. People are running out. I've been getting emails every day from Texas. Thankfully, I'm not there, telling me, not to use too much electricity. It's 110 degrees and they tell you not to, use your air conditioning. So it's hitting home. It's not some distant problem. Like, even, the ice cap, the water in Florida hit 100 degrees last week. Fish are, it's destroying the food chain.
Reefs,
So
the reefs,
it's a real thing. It's not the kind of thing, oh, who cares? The glaciers are melting. It's like, well, that's important too. But the fact is, it's hit really home now.
Bob, DeSantis took the words climate change out of all state of Florida websites and materials. And so it's just not happening. It's just that he's just deleted it. So we shouldn't worry about it. It's actually deleted a little bit the way his presidential campaign is getting deleted.
Trump is insane, right? But I think deep down, Trump does a lot of this just because he's insane, right?
And he's a showman.
Yeah, DeSantis is like freaking creepy and dark. Even I think more so. Like getting into a fight over slavery. Like, who the fuck does that? Who's like, yeah, we're gonna say slavery like helped you. Like, who does that?
It was a resume builder. It was a resume builder.
The other Republican candidates are attacking him for that. Mitch Metzamorta McConnell, and others, so it's insane. And it's so unreal. I know, having lived through, this incredible move to the right, it's just, you think it can't get worse. I don't know how many times we've said that, like, it can't get worse. Like, yeah, it can,
The scary part is that, where we didn't think the politics could get any worse, and now we're seeing the result of the politics, which is like a crumbling, a collapsing climate and ecosystems, huge wealth gaps, this Gilded Age economy that we're basically living in, where a lot of people are employed and there's a whole lot of other people who are like suffering. this like, militarism in Europe and militarism in East Asia. I mean, it's actually some of the protests that are being planned around APEC around U.S. militarism. I mean, they're wanting to build like something like 7 or 8 new bases in the Philippines, and a big organizing body are like Filipino student Marxist Filipino students in California, because they're very well organized here.
The U.S. military is the biggest creator of pollution in the world.
It has the largest climate. It has the largest carbon footprint of any institution in the world.
Yeah, it's just quite remarkable.
I also want to say, for like these, to take it back to APEC for a second, is for these APEC nations, also like especially the bigger ones, the bigger economies. I think they're like the biggest advocates. They all have sort of like public relations that are what I would call greenwash around how they're acting on climate, et cetera. But like Japan, the Japanese banking sector is like funding deforestation and fossil fuel projects all over the world. And part of what Kishida is doing in APEC is like promoting, the Japanese banking sector to do that. And, same goes with the US, is like, Biden and Manchin are like, have like signed off on some this terrible project, the Mountain Valley Pipeline, which we're having an episode on soon. They've signed off on the Willow project. There's liquefied natural gas export happening all over the Gulf Coast. Like, this is Obama. This isn't just the Republicans. This is like Obama and Biden as well in the last 20 years.
Yeah, except the Republicans don't, kind of insult you by calling themselves the most pro-union or the most pro-environmental
climate
party.
champions, climate champions,
like Biden does, so
yeah, and Obama,
Obama. Yeah, but Obama, well, didn't he at a speech say something like, "You see all those offshore? I did that." He takes credit for it. So
yeah, I mean, we've been seeing that. I was actually really involved in a campaign against the Keystone XL pipeline about 10 years ago, and they built an extension of that pipeline from, Oklahoma down to the Texas Gulf Coast, and where Obama was talking about how he's this pro-climate president, and he did all this, like, he put out solar panels on the White House or whatever, but then he like goes and makes a speech at the pipe yard where they're building the extension of the Keystone pipeline, and he's like approving it.
Yeah,
it's disgusting.
This is why we talk
and
about
the fact that liberals
so
love him so much.
Yeah,
that's so gross.
I mean, it's no secret that Trump and these people are scary. They really are. They're so freaking insane and dangerous. But when the people who are supposed to be defending your interests and who beg and plead for you to vote for them, because it's the most important election ever, and if you don't vote for the Democrats, you're going to have fascism, and then you see what they actually do, and it's really sobering. It's really frightening, because it's basically a bum rush now. Both sides are careening toward like literal environmental extermination, and that's not hyperbolic. I mean, look what's happening in the world. Look at the heat. Look at the there's an increase. There are increases now in cholera, typhoid, dengue fever. Florida has an outbreak of leprosy. So we're what Trump said something about shithole countries. Like, there are parts of Texas and Florida and all over. Every state has them. In Ohio, where you really have these kind of, what you would call like third world conditions, the level of poverty, the level of, things like here where I'm in Ohio is one of the worst opioid addiction places in the country, right? So these are all products of kind of a society just falling apart at the seams, and the environment has a big part of that. I know, I mean, that's been the story of the summer, right? The heat, the fires, the superstorms,
there's flooding in different parts of Europe,
Vermont,
Vermont.
just the intense, it's just terrifying. And there's this casual approach to it, or people who think the answer is, nuclear power or more private planes, or, like you have to use air conditioning. You have it. I got that.
We just need electrified private jets, and we'll be good.
Yeah, electric jets, right? No, but
or biofuels, maybe biofuel. Just kidding, folks.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's really, we're kind of at point zero, and I don't know how to get out of this, because there's no sense of urgency, no sense of alarm. I saw a thing the other day, some right wingers were saying, well, the ozone layer isn't as bad as it used to be. It's like, the environment did get better in 2020 because you had 3-4 months of shutdown, right? So, but we're back on full scale, kind of production again. And so it's bad. And you know, it's funny because people don't like make the connection. They complain about the heat, they complain about the weather, they complain about the storms, and don't see, you know, this kind of fossil fuel connection to it. And you know, it's really I don't know. I don't see. I'm not really hopeful. You know, obviously,
It's pretty scary times.
yeah, it really is. So, but it is what it is. So it's good to have you back.
Yep.
We'll start having a more normal routine now.
Yeah.
We'll start, like I said, keep your eyes open. We'll start talking about JFK a lot and have some guests on, and we're kind of still working on a lot of that stuff. But this will be, you'll now have your JFK seminar, so you can go out there and, you know, when these silly people like Oliver Stone's crazy assassinology crew says things, you can say, no, that's not it at all. You know, you're just wrong about that. So
yeah.
And otherwise,
study up.
Listen to some Tony Bennett music. Put on a Pee Wee Herman video for a laugh. You know,
Read some James Baldwin.
Read some James Baldwin. Listen to Sinead O'Connor. You know, read some of her stuff. And
yeah,
you know, we have to keep the ancestors in our thoughts. So
yep.
And enjoy what's left of the summer, because it's ending soon, right? Kids are going back to school in a couple weeks. Like in California, they start soon, don't they?
I think they start in a week or two.
Yeah, Jesus Christ. I know, and it's funny, like in Houston, you know, a lot of the school buses in Houston, I don't know if they are, but when my kid was in school, they weren't air conditioning. And these kids would get off the buses, they'd be like red and they'd look like hell, and you'd have to give them water, and it was like crazy.
Caked in sweat.
Yeah. I mean, there are like in Texas, I don't know how many people now have died from the heat. They've had UPS driver died, a letter carrier died. I mean, you're out and, you know, here in Ohio, it's, you know, it's 80 degrees, but, you know, you're walking with a big bag of mail, and, you know, and can you imagine in Texas, heat index is 110 and you're delivering mail? Jesus, there's
well,
no
and
shade.
then Greg, there's also where, you know, and we can do a Scrappy Sunday on this in the future, but like, you know, there's also where Greg Abbott is like rolling back worker protection for them being able to take water breaks in the heat. That's
what they're saying is like, what makes you think like, hey, let's do this? Like, let's deprive water to people in 110-degree heat. Now, I'm assuming that in most of these places, they're still going to get water because, you know, you don't need your workers dying on you. You know, I keep thinking of that scene at the beginning of Blazing Saddles, you know, when, you know, they're more concerned about the hand cart than Cleavon Little, right?
Yeah. That's
kind of the way they are, you know, like at some point, you know, you probably don't want your workers dying on you, and, you know, give them a glass of water. But can you imagine working in the fields and the farms and right now in this weather in the valley? Jesus.
Southern California is like that. Yeah.
Now, Abbott is really, and DeSantis, they're so cruel and so vicious and so inhuman. And my God, it's terrifying, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty scary times.
They're colder than your ex-wife, you know, or whatever.
Or your ex-wife.
Well, I didn't mean yours. You don't have one, but no, I just meant in general, you know.
Yeah.
Ex-spouse.
Ex-spouse. Folks, you're listening to the comical connotations of the Green and Red podcast.
Connotations.
The non-pseudo intellectual predatory conversation from the Green and Red podcast. Leigh Phillips, you know, feel free to comment on us. We don't really give a shit.
Join us, man. Come on on. And we'll have anybody on. We believe in free speech, man. Bring it on.
Yeah, bring it on.
We ain't like the Jacobin left ignores us. They ignore people. They're big enough they can do that. So if you say something against them,
except when we interview some of them for our show, they like they like to be on our show if it promotes them. But
yeah. But in general, they ignore what we say because we're not, you know, big enough for them.
Yep. If you like what you're hearing, though, check us out on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. Check us out on all of your great podcast listening platforms. Give us a rate and a review. It helps us with the algorithm. And then if you really like us, check us out at greenredpodcast.org and hit that support button, or become a patron at patreon.com/greenredpodcast. I also want to do a shout out. We've had a lot of like recent donations from friends and comrades and audience members. So just want to say thanks to all of y'all too. Thanks for helping us keep the lights on. Very important here. So and we will talk to you again soon. Big trouble, and we'll talk soon.
Tell me that you So many times I've let you down,